The answer to the title of this video, is capitalism perfect, is obviously no. But you could replace the word capitalism with any other economic system and you would get the exact same answer. If anyone tells you that they have the perfect economic system, be it capitalism or any other, you should probably run for your life and keep an eye on your pockets. There is no economic system that can be perfect, and the reason for that is that it deals with human action, which is not perfect. This is really not a question about perfection, but rather a twofold question. One pragmatic, is it efficient? And one moral, is it morally good? Many, if not most of the common criticisms of capitalism rest on the scarcity of resources and inequality amongst the individuals. The truth is evident and obvious for anyone who tries to understand capitalism. In capitalism, there is inequality and there is scarcity. There's no denying that. Most opponents and proponents of capitalism, for that matter, know this truth. This is sufficient for most lazy thinkers to discredit capitalism. But if you examine this situation a bit further, you realize something very important about this truth, and that is that scarcity and inequality are not characteristics of capitalism, but rather of the reality it deals with. Saying scarcity and inequality are characteristics of capitalism is like saying that illness is a characteristic of medicine. The reality is that scarcity is a characteristic of nature and inequality is a characteristic of action. Praxeology tells us that humans act, and every action involves a decision. Every decision is really an economic decision. Since we assign different values to different resources, the economy cannot be perfect because it is in a sense resting on subjective values. The scarcity of nature and the inequality of action are not characteristics of capitalism the same way that the propensity of the human body to become sick is not a characteristic of medicine. It's not because of medicine that people get sick, the same way that it's not because of capitalism that inequality and scarcity exist. So going back to our two questions, we could ask, is capitalism an efficient way of dealing with scarcity? And we can also ask, is capitalism morally correct when dealing with human inequality? Let's start with the pragmatic approach, the one about scarcity. In a free market, prices carry a very important amount of information. If unhampered with, they will be the most efficient way of allocating resources. Individuals acting in society create a demand for all finite resources. Supply and demand are the direct consequence of human action. Resources that are becoming increasingly more scarce will see their price increased ceteris paribus, that is, everything else equal. Resources that see its demand increased will also see its price increased ceteris paribus. On the contrary, if for any event a resource becomes less scarce, its price will go down ceteris paribus. And if the demand for a specific resource is decreased, then the price also will go down ceteris paribus. These are all realities of human action and are the same for any economic system. In an economic system without prices, resources would be allocated almost randomly, regardless of their demand and scarcity. Either a dictator would have to decide how to allocate all resources, or it would be a first-come, first-take society. In either case, allocation would be highly inefficient. If everything were to be free, the demand of any given product would skyrocket and approach infinity. For example, if cars were free, I would have like 10 of them or more. I would have a car to go to work, a sports car, an SUV, a truck to move things, a fancy Aston Martin, a van, etc., etc. Gas, parking spots, tires will also be free. This all sounds very nice, but there can't be infinite cars available and also infinite gas and tires available simply because of the undeniable fact of scarcity. This all sounds very intuitive and obvious, but believe me, there are quasi-economic theories out there based on free everything. The Venus Project, for example, defines a resource-based economy in the following way. The term and meaning of resource-based economy is a holistic economic system in which all goods and services are available without the use of money, credit, barter, or any other system of debt and servitude. All resources become the common heritage of all the inhabitants, not just a select few. The premise upon which the system is based is that the earth is abundant with plentiful resources. Our practice of rationing resources through monetary methods is irrelevant and counterproductive to our survival. So there you have it. I'm not making this stuff up. Their quasi-economy is based on the non-fact that the earth is abundant with plentiful resources is the same as saying that the resources are non-scarce or infinite, which is obviously not true. The only way that all resources would be common heritage of all the inhabitants would be for resources to be infinite. Or, I guess you could expect for demand to remain constant and finite when the price of a scarce good is zero. That, of course, does not describe reality, which makes it irrelevant. In a system with enforced prices, resources would tend to be wrongly allocated and would result in shortages and overproduction. If the price for a good were to be forcefully set below its market clearing price, that's where supply and demand are the same, the demand would grow and we would have shortages. For example, if a market clearing price of a product is $10 and there's an imposed price for it for $20, then everyone who wants to buy it for $20 would be able to find one to buy. But not everyone who has their products listed at $20 would be able to sell them all. So we would have an overstock. If the imposed price is $5, then everyone who wants to sell at $5 would be able to sell. But not everyone willing to buy at $5 would be able to find one to buy. So we would have a shortage. At market clearing price of $10, everyone willing to spend $10 would find one to buy, and everyone willing to sell for $10 would be able to sell. Again, these are facts of economics. They have nothing to do with capitalism and all to do with human nature. In all these examples, prices indicate how resources will be allocated. The freer the market and the prices are, the most efficiently the resources will be allocated. Another way of saying this is, the closer the system is to capitalism, the most allocation of resources will reflect the desire of the population expressed by their individual decisions. There is no perfect way to allocate resources because people make mistakes, and that is true for an entrepreneur as it is for a dictator. Now let's move on to the moral argument about inequality. If we are going to talk about inequality, it's necessary that we define equality, because it can really be defined in two different ways which are mutually exclusive. You can have equality of resources where everyone has the same resources as everyone else, or equality of rights where everyone has the same rights everyone else does. So why are these two mutually exclusive? Well, imagine that you somehow manage to assign the same exact amount of resources to everybody on Earth. Then we would have equality of resources. But then we would be faced with a question: do we allow trade or not? If we do allow trade, then at some point inequality of resources would emerge. For example, if amongst the various resources one was to be awarded with, we had 2 pounds of sugar and a knife, at some point someone would value 4 pounds of sugar more than they would value 2 pounds of sugar and a knife, and someone would value 2 knives more than they would 1 knife and 2 pounds of sugar, creating an opportunity for trade. After the trade, we would have someone with 2 knives and someone with 4 pounds of sugar, creating inequality of resources. In this case, equality of resources and equality of rights would be mutually exclusive. Now let's analyze the second option, where you don't allow trade. If you assign the same resources to everyone and prohibit them from trading, it may at first seem as if you have found a stable balance where everyone would have the same rights and the same stuff. But the implication is that in order to keep people from trading, a group of individuals would have special rights to keep others from trading and even punishing those who trade. Those individuals would be in a position of inequality of rights compared to the rest, thus making equality of rights and equality of resources mutually exclusive. So let's examine the two options from a moral standpoint. First, equality of resources. As we just saw, we can only have equality of resources at the expense of equality of rights. If different individuals have different rights, then rights are not universal, and it is very easy to see how this situation is immoral. When someone has the right to impose his or her will upon others, this situation is very easy to discard from a moral standpoint. So we are left with the second option, equality of rights at the expense of equality of resources. When everyone has the same rights, the inequality of resources would emerge not as a consequence of the decisions of a third party, but out of everyone's own individual decisions. If you decide to give up your knife for an extra 2 pounds of sugar, it is evident that you'll end up with a different set of resources than the rest. But you can't hardly argue that this is immoral, since this is what both parties involved in the trade wanted. Now, you could argue that this would eventually create inequality in terms of freedom, because at some point, some would have the freedom to buy a private jet, and some would not. This criticism emerges from a very common misunderstanding. It comes from the confusion of freedom and capacity. For example, everyone has the freedom to jump out into outer space if we choose to. We are free to do it, and no one can stop us. However, we are not in the capacity to do it, be it because our knees can't produce the energy necessary to abandon Earth's gravitational pull, or because we can't breathe outside of Earth's atmosphere. We are free to do it, we are just not capable of doing it. The same way, everyone is free to run 100 meters in 9.63 seconds, but only Usain Bolt has ever been capable to do it. Does that mean that you don't have the freedom to do it? No, it just means you can't. So, going back to our question, is equality of rights moral? We have a state of morality if everyone has freedom to do the same things, even if our own nature keeps us from having the same capacities. There's nothing we can do about us being all different, and so it is irrelevant to talk about the morality of human difference if it's not a consequence of our actions. So a free market where everyone has the same rights is morally correct. In conclusion, the short answer to the question, is capitalism perfect, is no. The larger answer is, capitalism is the most efficient and effective way of assigning resources and the most morally correct economic system. If you have a more efficient way of economizing while still being morally correct, please post it in the comments.